Thank you. Today we're going to do a prophecy update. I've titled it Falling Apart, mainly because I didn't know what else to call it. There's no rhyme or reason to this particular title, but we do talk about things going on in the world of Bible prophecy today. And we see all of the signs that point to the return and the rapture and the return of the Lord and the things that are going to happen in the 70th week converging, coming into play, certainly in the area of what we would call stage setting at least. And they're so apparent. I read an article this week by a noted Bible prophecy teacher who said that he had resigned from a prophecy study group because the director of the group was saying, there's nothing going to happen before the rapture. There's nothing going to happen. You won't see anything happen. Nothing will happen. And I agree with the person who resigned from that group that there is stuff that's going to happen. And it's apparent, and it's readily apparent to everybody who's paying attention. So today I'm going to touch a little bit on financial stuff. Then I'm going to go off into really what is sort of the heart of the title, Falling Apart, and I think you'll see why. And then I'm going to do a teaching, if I have time, on a subject somebody asked me to do. I think I can get it done in about 30 minutes or so on Petra. Some of our friends were in Petra this week, and Petra is very significant from a prophetic standpoint. Now, you should know that J.P. Morgan Chase, the largest bank in America, has really issued a statement sort of hoping that people stop dealing in cash. Now, wait a minute, they're a bank, right? They don't want people taking cash out of the bank, and they don't want people putting cash in the bank, and they issued a directive this week, that if you have a safety deposit box at a Chase bank, you will not be allowed to put cash or coins or precious metals into your safety deposit box. Now, I'm not sure why that is. I suspect that there's a much, much bigger thing behind that kind of a directive. There are a lot of banks now that are very severely limiting you on what you can withdraw in terms of cash. In Switzerland, the Swiss National Bank, the Central Bank of Switzerland, which we've always considered Swiss bankers, I mean, they're rock solid, right? I mean, nothing crazy would ever happen in Switzerland in banking. They now pay negative interest rates on cash deposits. In other words, you put your money in the bank, and they take money out and never pay you interest. If you have a loan, you get paid interest by the bank because you have a negative interest rate. It's upside down. It's crazy. And the world economic system is just, if you look at it, it's insane. I mean, if you look at charts of stocks are going way up and profits and anticipated profits and earnings are way down, but the stock market keeps going up because they're distorting the market by putting all this money into it. And so the Swiss National Bank, now there are hedge fund and mutual fund managers that have large cash deposits at the Swiss banks. So they go and they say, I've got $25 million on deposit here. I don't want you to take money out of that because I have to account to the people that invest their money in our mutual fund. Why am I paying money to let the money sit in your bank? So I want to take it out. And the Swiss banks have said, the statement of the one Swiss bank was, we are sorry that within the time period specified, no solution corresponding to your expectations could be found. Now that sounds like it was written by a Swiss banker. Or an attorney, or a banker. Let's get them all. And the guy went to the bank and asked for an explanation. They said, well, you really shouldn't withdraw it because we're holding on to it for the collective good. So now collectivism is sort of the watchword in some of the Swiss banks. This is very troubling to me as I see these things kind of unfold. About 2 months ago, Lawrence Kotlikoff, who is a professor of economics at Boston University, and he wrote a book a number of years ago called The Coming Generational Storm, What You Need to Know About America's Economic Future. And he went to the Senate Budget Committee and he testified about the problems with the Senate Budget Committee, talking about the deficit and the national debt and those sort of things. So I'm going to play a little bit of those, just a little bit of his testimony, and listen to what he says. He is saying, essentially, we're broke. We are really broke. Detroit was broke when it filed for bankruptcy. Detroit was much better off financially than the federal government is now, today. And it doesn't look like they get better. And he has a solution there. I don't know if it's in the clip. If not, I'll tell you at the end. So here's Kotlikoff before the Senate Budget Committee.
Coming as an economist, I think economics has something to say that's independent of politics, and the best economists are neither Republicans or Democrats. They're just focused on what economic science tells us, and that's what I'm here to try and relate to you today. And the first point I want to get across is that our nation is broke. Our nation's broke, and it's not broken 50 years or 75 years or 30 years, 10 years or 5 years. It's broke today. Just like Detroit is broke today in terms of looking at all the obligations it has to pay and all the revenues it has to collect, that it projects it collects. It's a entity that's broke, and it's not broke in the future. It's really broke today. And that's the case for the U.S. And that analysis is not based on looking at what Congress declares to be its official liabilities, but rather by looking at all the liabilities that the U.S. government faces, and those include not just official servicing of the what's called the official debt, but also paying for Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, defense spending, paying for the president's lunch, for the Supreme Court members' salaries, for fixing up the highways. But those are the obligations into the future that are projected by the CBO. And then there's also assets, which are the value of all the taxes that are being projected. And economics tells us that we need to focus on not a subset of the obligations that have to be paid, not the payment for principal and interest on what's called official debt, but we have to look at all the obligations, regardless of what it's called, because Congress has enormous leeway, indeed infinite leeway, in terms of classifying certain payments that it has to make as repayment of principal plus interest versus versus transfer payments. And that leeway means that the official debt is really not a well-defined economic concept. And that's the thrust of my testimony today, that we are kind of tracking our fiscal position based on a non-measure of fiscal solvency. And what economics says and what economists as a group are saying is that we need to study and look at the fiscal gap, the infinite horizon fiscal gap, which is the present value, the value in the present.
I'll translate that. You guys aren't telling the truth about how much debt is owed and obligations of the federal government. You don't have a clue what's going on. He goes on.
Of all the expenditure commitments, no matter what they're called, whether they're called Social Security or defense spending or paying, servicing what's called the official debt, less the present value of all the projected tax receipts. Now that fiscal gap calculation has been endorsed by over 1,200 economists. If you go to the informact.org, there's a bill that was a bipartisan bill that was introduced last year. I hope it will be passed this year. It's a bill to require the CBO, the GAO, and the OMB to do fiscal gap accounting on a routine basis and to put everything on the books to stop this Enron type accounting that's been going on for decades. Senators keep talking about the deficit. The true deficit is $5 trillion between last year and this year, because the fiscal gap in the chart you'll see went from $205 trillion to $210 trillion. So
I understand that. I'm trying to distinguish. You're lumping together what I call unfunded liabilities with the.
Okay, this is a conservative senator, by the way, saying no, you're talking about debt. But you're talking about you're lumping in unfunded liabilities about that. That's not really debt. Who, by the way, who elects these people? I mean, really. You all should be ashamed of yourselves. And this guy's not a bad senator.
The public debt. I mean,
well, the economic theory doesn't know what the public debt is. It's just a matter of word games. You guys are engaged in a word game and have been for decades. That's why, my mom's, again, Social Security checks is a debt. It's not on the books.
I agree.
So what you call interest is a matter of your language. What you call the deficit this year is a matter of your language. Senator Warner said that we can all choose our accounting method. Economists, 1,200 strong, 17 Nobel Prize winners, are saying you cannot.
Senator Warren is the darling of the progressive left. She says, you can choose your own accounting method. Doesn't make any difference. This is, I think you'll see how this ties into my next session in just a moment. But he goes on to say, look, his point was, we had, a year ago, we owed actual existing debt plus unfunded liabilities. The federal government owed $205 trillion. That's many times the size of our economy. He said to get things back on track, right now, we need an immediate 58% increase in taxes. How many of you would, how would that fit into your budget? But he said from last year to this year, you people say, look how good we did. I mean, you hear Obama out there and this other person that's running for president. Oh, we're doing great. The economy's roaring back and people are, the unfunded liabilities went from $205 trillion to $210 trillion in 1 year. So he says, you guys are lying. You're playing word games. This is bad. $5 trillion in 1 year. It's unbelievable. So, let me tie this together. In 2 Timothy chapter 3, Paul tells us about what's going to happen in the last days and what's going to happen on a geopolitical scale, a cultural scale, a societal scale, and a moral and religious scale. And he says this, 2 Timothy chapter 3, but realize this, that in the last days difficult times will come. Now he's going to explain why. For men will be lovers of self, lovers of money, boastful, arrogant, revilers, disobedient to parents, ungrateful, unholy, unloving, irreconcilable, malicious gossips, without self-control, brutal, haters of good, treacherous, reckless, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, holding to a form of godliness, although they have denied its power. Avoid such men as these. That really describes, in my view, the people in charge. And I think that that conclusion is inescapable and cannot really be challenged. About a month ago, in early March, in the New York Times on the op-ed page, a philosophy professor had wrote an article, an op-ed called this, Why Our Children Don't Think There Are Moral Facts. Every now and then, the New York Times swerves into something that's worth reading. Other than worth reading so you can tear it apart, but this one's actually worth reading. Listen to a couple of these paragraphs. What would you say if you found out that our public schools were teaching children that it is not true that it's wrong to kill people for fun or cheat on tests? Would you be surprised? I was. As a philosopher, I already knew that many college-age students don't believe in moral facts. While there are no national surveys quantifying this phenomenon, philosophy professors with whom I have spoken suggest that the overwhelming majority of college freshmen in their classrooms view moral claims as mere opinions that are not true or are true only relative to a culture. Now, this is a secular professor at a secular university writing about the students that come to his college. Now, he's been torn apart because he says, well, I don't have a national survey to quantify this. I can just tell you what I see in my classroom every day. So people write and say, well, if you don't have a study, I mean, my goodness, if you don't have a study, you have to have a study to support everything, I guess, because common sense doesn't have any play anymore. And this is what's going on. So he says this: if students are already showing up to college with this view of morality, it's very unlikely that it's the result of what professional philosophers are teaching. So where is the view coming from? And he goes on and he talks about the fact that he looked into the Common Core studies, and he found that they say facts, something that is proven, something that is true about a subject, it can be tested or proven. An opinion is what someone thinks, feels, or believes. And then he went through some of the Common Core exercises, like killing someone is wrong, cheating on your spouse is wrong. And in every case, the Common Core study was to lead them that that was a matter of opinion and not fact, because they don't accept that it can be an opinion and a fact can be the same thing. So you always have to split it into one or the other. And whenever the moral claims came up in the study or in the lesson plan, they were to be directed, the students were to be directed that those moral claims were opinions. This is a huge problem. This is what our kids are being taught in schools. It's where people are being directed. And so that when they get to college, remember Ken Ham, he got a lot of criticism for saying already gone. When kids go to college, they're already gone. You lost them in church because of the way you taught them. Does this support 2 Timothy chapter 3 as to what's going to happen in the last days? This is, in my opinion, this is as frightening as ISIS. Because ISIS beheading Christians on a beach in Libya is wrong. In most colleges, that will be viewed as merely your opinion. And who am I to say? That's their culture. And once you go down that road, it's over. It's over. And do you think our politicians are helping the problem or exacerbating it? I think the conclusion is clear there. So Megyn Kelly had some people on to talk about what's going on colleges, because we got to be careful. We don't want to offend people. And here's just a little report from her.
Another report tonight from an American college campus where some students want to silence a speaker they don't happen to agree with. Students at a public university in Texas are petitioning against their own governor, Greg Abbott, as their graduation speaker because they say, well, he's just not diverse enough and, quote, does not align the spirit of the University of North Texas. In just the last week, I should say, 2 other colleges were at the center of controversy after students protested a conservative author who had been invited to speak about sexual assault. Students complained that her mere presence was so offensive they needed to post trigger warnings on campus so people could get prepared to deal with their upset. Joining me now.
By the way, you know which college that was? About 90 miles straight north, Oberlin College. The conservatives and libertarians invited Christina Hoff Sommers, who identifies herself as a feminist, but thinks that, this rape charges and rape culture that supposedly exists on college campuses is way overblown. And boy, they fought it.
Warning, here she comes, that author, Christina Hoff Sommers, who is an outspoken feminist and a resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute. Great to see you, Christina. Oh,
Nice
they
to be
don't
here.
let you have that label feminist because you're not the kind of feminist they believe in, and you don't say the stuff they want you to say, and therefore they want you to shut your mouth. And if you don't shut your mouth, then everyone needs to be held before you come on the campus and told that they can go to their safe space if you have the nerve to show up.
They have safe rooms where they go. At Brown University, for example, they have Play-Doh and bubbles and tape recordings of puppy dogs. It's so infantilizing. It's so shocking to me as a philosophy professor that free speech, free expression, I mean, the campuses have become a hostile environment for free expression.
As I understand it, when you were going to Georgetown University to speak, they had to create a safe zone for people who were so overwhelmed by your presence there. It was like, I can't even.
And
I
they
have to go
wanted.
to- and in the meantime, you had been receiving so many threats for your mere appearance, they had to give you a security guard to maintain your actual physical safety.
I don't know that there were threats, but the tone of the criticism on Facebook postings and other places alarmed the campus authorities. So they thought perhaps I needed protection from the safe spacers.
Did they give you a little Play-Doh? I mean, we're like, could you walk around?
I will say at Oberlin, I wouldn't have minded going to their safe room because it was so intense. I walk into the hall and it's filled. They had kept changing the room because there were greater numbers of people wanted to come to protest me being on campus. And the room was filled with people with posters and placards and
It's like,
and then
Christina, it is like we are ruining the upcoming generation. Life doesn't involve only people who think the way you think, college students. You have to kind of get used to people with opposing views.
Exactly. And, you know, it used to be people would come and debate me or they wouldn't like my views. Now they say I pose a threat to their safety. And I am a moderate liberal feminist. There is nothing incendiary about my views. That's what's also shocking.
You don't buy the full dogma about things like the numbers about sexual assaults on campus. Neither does Brit Hume. Neither do a lot of people who aren't sexist or misogynist.
Neither do a lot of campus feminists who speak out against it. But as one professor did at Northwestern, Laura Kipnis, she spoke out against this sort of rape culture rhetoric and the trigger warnings in the Chronicle of Higher Education. Well, her article triggered students, and they're demanding that she be sanctioned, and it's very bad. It's a real threat to freedom.
Yeah, I end
freedom of speech.
I end this segment with the profound words of my old trainer, Dave, back in the day when I still worked out. Toughen up, Buttercup. That's what those college students need to be told. Christina, good to see you.
No more chicken at Johns Hopkins University. The Student Government Association there voting this week against a proposal to potentially bring Chick-fil-A to campus because of the owner's support for traditional marriage. They have a resolution saying prospective and current students, staff, faculty, and other visitors who are members of the LGBT community would be subjected to the microaggression of supporting current or future Chick-fil-A development plans. Our next guest says this is just the latest in a series of attempts by campus liberals to silence those with different opinions. Andrew Guernsey is a junior at JHU. He defended Chick-fil-A at the Student Government Association's vote, and he joins us live. Hey, good morning, Andrew. So you lost that vote. Why? What's going on at Johns Hopkins University?
Well, good morning, Peter. It's great to be on the show with you.
Happy to have you.
What's happening on my campus, and I can speak as the president of the Pro-Life Club, which they even blocked us from having a club on campus, but now we're seeing them now blocking a Chick-fil-A from even a hypothetical one from forming on campus. And the reason, I think, is an increasing intolerance towards students who have a religious or socially conservative point of view.
What did they say about why there couldn't be a Chick-fil-A, and what did you say in vociferously arguing against that position?
So when I came to Hopkins University, and I'm very blessed to be there, I thought there would be a free exchange of ideas. But what I'm finding is this increasing intolerance from my peers, and the student government in particular, has led them to say that they literally fear for their physical safety because students have different opinions on the campus. And the idea that students who, like me, who would agree with Dan Cathy that marriage is between moms and dads amounts to hate speech that should be banned from campus is incompatible with the university's commitment to free speech.
Are you surprised by this at Johns Hopkins University, that there isn't an ability to exercise the kind of discussion and the kind of freedom in terms of First Amendment opinion that there should be?
Well, George Will wrote about this when he wrote about our case, that it seems that colleges and universities are seeming to value diversity in everything but thought. And I think this is a disturbing trend on college campuses, like mine.
Last question, Andrew. And you mentioned something about a pro-life club that the university didn't want any part of, or they gave you a hard time about starting it. Just quickly tell us what happened with that.
Well, even just last week, they tried to ban a fetal model table of just medically accurate of little babies, and this is at the world's leading medical school too. And I think that Johns Hopkins is big enough to have people with different points of view on campus.
Yeah. Points of view are important, Andrew Guernsey. Thanks for your efforts for freedom of expression there at Johns Hopkins.
Well, you need to pray about this. Tuesday morning, you can probably listen live online if you want to the oral arguments on the Ohio case and some other cases about traditional marriage that are going to take place at the United States Supreme Court. Tuesday morning, please pray. A lot of organizations are asking for that, and I think it's a good thing that we do that, because this is a major decision that's coming down. I mean, whether people can vote to make a moral decision, a moral judgment, and put it into law is at stake. And it may turn on one person's vote, Justice Kennedy. Some of the amicus briefs, friend of the court briefs, have been filed, one by the American Sociological Association. And I want you to listen how they're arguing the case, okay? They are arguing that people who support traditional marriage, no, you can't, that's wrong, that's unconstitutional, violates equal protection. He says this: their first argument in their brief was, the scholarly consensus is clear and consistent. Children of same-sex parents fare just as well as children of different-sex parents. Second, claims that children fare better with different-sex parents than with same-sex parents are unsupported by social science research. That is a big fat lie. It is a big fat lie. But this is what's passing for studies. You want your studies? They got to study. The California Council of Churches and some others, the Universalist Justice Ministry of California, Northern California, Nevada Conference, United Church of Christ, United Church of Christ, Pacific Association of Reformed Rabbis, the California Network of Metropolitan Community Churches, also filed an amicus brief. And it says this: according equal dignity to same-sex couples' marriages poses no threat to religious liberty. Big fat lie again. But this is written by a very well-respected law firm, and has some people down in Cincinnati helping write this. Back to the New York Times article. Let's see, I already covered this. Okay, well, this New York Times article where he talked about children don't think there are moral facts. As it turns out, the Common Core standards used by a majority of K-12 programs in the country require that students be able to distinguish among fact, opinion, and reasoned judgment in a text. And the Common Core Institute provides a helpful page full of links to definitions, lesson plans, and quizzes to ensure that students can tell the difference between facts and opinions. But worse, students are taught that claims are either facts or opinions. They are given quizzes in which they must sort claims into one camp or the other, but not both. But if a fact is something that is true and an opinion is something that is believed, then many claims will obviously be both. In summary, our public schools teach students that all claims are either facts or opinions, and that all value and moral claims fall into the latter camp. The punchline: there are no moral facts. And if there are no moral facts, then there are no moral truths. And if there are no moral truths, then a well-respected law firm can actually, with a straight face, go to the Supreme Court and say that children with different sex parents might have a different experience than children with same-sex parents. Because you know why? Common sense tells you that they will. Indeed, in the world beyond grade school, where adults must exercise their moral knowledge and reasoning to conduct themselves in the society, the stakes are greater. Their consistency demands that we acknowledge the existence of moral facts. If it's not true that it's wrong to murder a cartoonist with whom one disagrees, then how can we be outraged? If there are no truths about what is good or valuable or right, how can we prosecute people for crimes against humanity? If it's not true that all humans are created equal, then why vote for any political system that doesn't benefit you over the others? And last Sunday, to prove the point, the Los Angeles Times had this article, editorial, on its editorial page, Abortion Rights Under Attack. And listen to what it says. Kansas and Oklahoma this month became the first states to ban the safest, most widely used method of abortion in the second trimester. The nearly identical laws, which are both referred to as the Unborn Child Protection from Dismemberment Abortion Act, outlaw the procedure known as dilation and evacuation, which is described in the Kansas legislation as dismembering a living unborn child and extracting such unborn child one piece at a time from the uterus. The bills were designed to make the procedure sound as gruesome. You need to listen to this paragraph and ask me if this person's moral compass is not just broke and smashed to smithereens. The bills were designed to make the procedure sound as gruesome as possible in non-medical, emotion-laden terms. However, the legislatures are accurate on the basics of the procedure. In a D&E, the fetus is removed with forceps and disarticulation, a medical term that means dismemberment, but is less likely to be used in a horror movie, usually occurs according to the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. Then it says this: the fact is, lots of surgical procedures sound horrific. Most are intensely invasive and unpleasant to describe. In this case, the dismemberment is being done to fetuses that are not viable outside the womb and that scientists can agree cannot feel pain. Do you understand how morally bankrupt that statement is? That it's just another medical procedure. It's like having your uterus removed, or, well, yeah, it does involve dismembering a fetus, but, it's just not a real person. And this occurs after the point of viability. So, in effect, Ayaan Hirsi Ali is getting some of the same grief, talking about, she has a book out called Heretic, Why Islam Needs a Reformation. Now, I have a lot of respect for Ayaan Hirsi Ali. She's a very brave, courageous woman to speak out like this, but I think she is on a fool's errand trying to reform Islam. Islam will be reformed. We'll see how that will happen in a little bit when I talk about Petra. But, and a lot of criticism, they're saying, well, she's just making this up to support unnecessary wars. Why do we have to do this? A Muslim man wrote this. While many in the West have been receptive to her case, Hirsi Ali's vicious attacks on Islam and her support for the war on terror, fought mainly in Muslim countries, why do you think that is, have left her with few friends among Muslims, including women. Hirsi Ali once famously called Islam a nihilistic cult of death, and she has advocated for a war with Islam. Hirsi Ali's story provides the best cover to masquerade the detrimental politicking of the mainstream Western press. While she has brought attention to the oppression that some Muslim women face, she has done so by simplistically blaming Islam, wrote Evelyn Al-Sultani of the University of Michigan on Hirsi Ali's precarious logic. And I don't have time to play a clip of her speaking about this because I have to play this clip, because this clip should trouble you as much as anything I've ever taught you about or talked to you about. Last week at the Women in the World Conference, Hillary Rodham Clinton, former U.S. Secretary of State, U.S. Senator, and First Lady, who's been out there tearing into CEOs who make way too much money, ignoring the fact that she and her husband made more than the top 50 CEOs of public corporations in America last year. She had this to say, and I want you to listen to this very carefully, especially near the end.
Some of you, I know, were with me in Beijing back in 1995 at the United Nations Fourth World Conference on Women. Representatives from 189 countries came together to declare with one voice that human rights are women's rights and women's rights are human rights once and for all. And finally, the world began to listen. And in the years that followed, we have seen change. We passed laws prohibiting violence against women, women elected to lead communities and countries. We made significant strides in closing gaps in health and education for women and girls around the world. And last month, the Clinton Foundation and the Gates Foundation unveiled a sweeping new report that gathers 20 years of data from around the world to document how far we have come and how far we still have to go. All the evidence tells us that despite the enormous obstacles that remain, there has never been a better time in history to be born female. Think about that. Yes, we've cut the maternal mortality rate in half, but far too many
Bruce Jenner's convinced.
women are still denied critical access to reproductive health care and safe childbirth. All the laws we've passed don't count for much if they're not enforced. Rights have to exist in practice, not just on paper. Laws have to be backed up with resources and political will. And deep-seated cultural codes, religious beliefs, and structural biases have to be changed.
Why aren't you applauding?
America moves forward when all women are guaranteed the right to make their own healthcare choices, not when those choices are taken away by an employer like Hobby Lobby. And we have to have leaders who recognize that the time has come. Yet there are those who offer themselves as leaders who take a very different view, who offer themselves as leaders who would defund the country's leading provider of family planning and want to let health insurance companies once again charge women just because of our gender. There are those who offer themselves as leaders who even play politics with the nomination of our nation's chief law enforcement officer and victims of human trafficking.
This is the money quote right here.
All the laws we've passed don't count for much if they're not enforced. Rights have to exist in practice, not just on paper. Laws have to be backed up with resources and political will. And deep-seated cultural codes, religious beliefs, and structural biases have to be changed.
You better get on board or we'll force you. You know, last week when she started this thing, you know, it's 18 months until the election. Have mercy. I'm tired of the Republican guys already. She said, well, we need to change the First Amendment so we can stop people funding campaigns. Anybody in the media asked this gal, hey, do you support what happened in Wisconsin? Do you know what happened in Wisconsin? People that were trying to put restrictions on public unions through the political process, at least 9 of them were served with subpoenas in the middle of the night, police showing up. By the way, why do police do this stuff? When these rogue prosecutors get out of control, are there any cops that are going to stand up and say, I'm not going to do that? That's not right. Somebody needs to, I don't know, stand up to it. Talked about a lady, she was ripped out of bed, not dressed, forced to stand there in front of 20 cops, told not to, they took her cell phone, her iPhone, her computer, her children's iPhones and computers, every computer and every phone in the house, and she was told, if you call a lawyer to find out about your rights on this, you will be put in jail for contempt. That is a fascist state. That is a prosecutor that is out of control and should be disbarred without much thought. The court all have held they were exercising free speech rights under the First Amendment. She wants to do away with that, folks. Wake up. Now she says we got to change people. What about the First Amendment and the free exercise of religion? You're seeing the real Hillary Clinton, the one who wrote her senior thesis at Wellesley College on Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, a book dedicated to Lucifer. I could show you the cover page. Okay? And one of Barack Obama's favorite books, too. Things aren't going to get better, folks. And if Obama's plan to get those 9 million to 12 million aliens citizenship status so they can vote in the next election, I told Bam, I'm looking at Panama and Belize and all sorts of places. Come quickly, Lord. That's all I can say. This is, I am very troubled by this. But I think this is 2 Timothy 3 in action, and it only gets worse from here. So get used to it. And nobody's going to call her on this. Oh, a few people will, but they won't get screened. They won't get through the screening process. So if you see her at Chipotle, don't bother talking to her because you haven't been approved by Clinton royalty yet as a subject worthy of talking to them. The world's falling apart. ISIS killed a bunch of Ethiopians. I won't go into this is a major crisis. We've talked about this a little bit. Europe's boat people, over 1,000 people died this week trying to get across the Mediterranean from Libya to Italy. Huge patterns of migration coming. I hear we're getting 75,000 Syrians into America. I think this is a problem. And there's huge migration going on into Europe right now. And Europe's going to flip. You know, I talked about studies that show that Europe might be Muslim controlled by 2050. I think it's going to be a lot sooner. And so if you look at it prophetically, and I don't want to argue about whether it's a European Antichrist or an Islamic Antichrist or, you know, an American or whatever. Look, one's coming, a world leader will emerge. I think you can make the case for all of those different views right now. But the European ones, if the Lord doesn't return soon, the Islamic Antichrist thing, and maybe somebody coming out of Europe who's Islamic. And by the way, I don't want to hear the argument, a good Muslim will never go into the temple and declare himself to be God, okay? It's not a good argument. Because why? Well, who said he was a good Muslim? He's possessed by Satan himself. Whoever it is possessed by Satan himself. I wouldn't put anything past that guy when he goes into the temple. This is another issue. This may play prophetically. From The Economist a week ago, cover story on dynasties, but a big article about a problem in India and China both on a very bad path. What is it? Where are the women? Where are the girls for all these boys to marry? Here's the statistics. In fact, this is one you should focus on. They say by 2050 or 60, for every 100 females in India of marriageable age, there will be 186 males on current trends. Think about that. 186 males competing for 100 females. How do you think that's going to work out? In China, the number is a little bit worse. It's about 100, not as bad, 166 males for every 100 females. right now, today in China, in the current generation of women, marriageable age, they're missing about 90 million women. They're short 90 million women for the males that want to get married. And these are cultures, Steve, you can correct me if I'm wrong, these are cultures that value marriage probably even more so than our culture. That is how you advance through society, is by getting married. And you have almost 2 males for every 1 female. This does not work out well. In fact, it's not hard to look at those numbers in China, India, and all of a sudden you come up with 200 million males with no spouse. Now, if that 200 million number sounds familiar, go read Revelation this afternoon. I don't have time to get into it. So let's look at Petra. I'm going to try to get you out of here in about when I'm done. If you have to leave, feel free. We'll take your name as you go. Petra, the rose-red city, half as old as time, they say. It's located south of the end of the Dead Sea, between the south end of the Dead Sea and the Gulf of Aqaba, where a lot is. Of course, we have these other areas, Megiddo and Jerusalem, that'll be important in the scriptures that we look at. Of course, Jerusalem as it exists right now. And so I'm going to go through some scriptures. You might want to open your Bible if you want to follow along. They'll be on the screen. The first passage we're going to look at in our little study on Petra and its prophetic significance is Matthew chapter 24, verse 15. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. Whoever is on the housetop does not go down to get things that are in his house. Whoever is in the field does not turn back to get his cloak. So we learn some things from here. First of all, Jesus refers to Daniel the prophet. That would seem to be that pretty good proof that Daniel actually wrote Daniel. Don't believe Daniel, believe Jesus. Okay? Sort of central. The other thing you learn from this is Jews are going to be living in Jerusalem at that time. They're going to build a temple. Now look, it's very controversial now, becoming more controversial in evangelicalism. They had a symposium at Georgetown last week about making the evangelical case for supporting Israel because it's declining. Lee Grady in Charisma Magazine last week wrote an article that said, what do people care about Bible prophecy? It's all going to pan out in the end. It's not that big a deal. And he went full Rick Warren. You know, it's not for you guys to know about this. Baloney. The scripture's full of the warnings to let us know. And we know that Jews will be living in Jerusalem. And so this week we celebrated this event in Jerusalem.
His entire life had been directed.
That's David Ben Gurion.
This right is the natural right of the Jewish people to be masters of their own fate, like all other nations, in their own sovereign state, which would open the gates of the homeland wide to every Jew, and confer upon the Jewish people the status of a fully privileged member of the Committee of Nations. Accordingly, we members of the National Executive, representatives of the Jewish community of Eretz Israel and of the Zionist movement, are here assembled on the day of the termination of the British mandate over Eretz Israel. And by virtue of our natural and historic right, and the strength of the resolution of the United Nations General Assembly, here declare the establishment of a Jewish state in Eretz Israel, to be known as the State of Israel.
It happened. Of course, the Palestinians this week were protesting. So we also see here that Daniel the prophet says, when you see the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place, we know that there'll be a temple, a Jewish temple rebuilt in Jerusalem from that statement. Now look, it's very controversial in evangelicalism, and I talk about it a lot. I'm very concerned with the trends that I see in the evangelical church about support for Israel. I say you're not paying attention to Scripture if you don't see Israel in the prophecies. For example, in Revelation chapter 12, it says this: a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and on her head was a crown of 12 stars. And she was with child, and she cried out, being in labor and in pain, and give birth. Now, it's very clear that that woman that's being talked about there is Israel, giving birth to the Messiah, fulfilling the prophecy back in Genesis that the seed of the woman would be the one that would crush the head of Satan. Verse 5, and she gave birth to a son, a male child who was to rule all the nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to God and to his throne. Remember that in a couple other prophetic passages we'll read later. Then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared by God so that she could be there and be nourished for 1,260 days. That's the length of the period of time after the abomination takes place until the second coming. 1,260 days, 3.5 years. A time times 1 year times 2 years and half a time. 1 year, 2 years, and half times 3.5 years. It's consistent throughout the book of Revelation. Now, I ask you this. If the woman's not gathered back in the land of Israel, how does she flee from Israel back into the wilderness? She has to be back in Israel. And there are other prophecies. Ezekiel 35 and 36 says they'll be gathered back in unbelief. It's unmistakably clear that this is what's going to happen. And people are teaching to the contrary, and I don't get it. So we know there'll be a temple. We know that there'll be Jews there, and there'll be a temple reconstructed on the Temple Mount. Maybe in that place, maybe on another location. So Jesus himself, then he says, those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. And this is, again, what we just read in Revelation chapter 12, and again, the periods of time which correspond to the last half of the 70th week of Daniel. And they will have to flee. So, when you're in Judea and you flee to the mountains, where do you go? Well, you know, Israel's constructed it's a very unique thing. There's this deep rift valley that goes through, of course, the lowest spot of land on the planet. The Sea of Galilee is, I think, 550 feet or so below sea level. And there's the mountains here, but there are also the mountains of Jordan and Edom. And I think that's where they're going to do. It's identified in Daniel chapter 11, starting in verse 40. At the time of the end, the king of the south will collide with him, and the king of the north will storm against him with chariots, with horsemen, and with many ships. We'll talk about those verses for a few hours, just that part. And he will enter countries, overflow them, and pass through. This is talking about the Antichrist. He will also enter into the beautiful land, and many countries will fall, but these will be rescued out of his hand: Edom, Moab, and the foremost of the sons of Ammon. And so that's how modern-day Jordan, this is the division. Ammon, I thought I had these on my map. I have the green is Ammon, the middle part is Moab, you know the story of Ruth, and then Edom is the southern part. That's where Esau's descendants went. And within there is this city called Petra. It's a fascinating city. We could spend a lot of time on it. I've been there. It's one of the unique places. Everybody should go once, I think. I don't know if I want to endure going through Jordan again to get there a second time with all the extra time it takes at the border and whatnot. But there's this valley, the parking lot's here, and you kind of walk in through this narrow, winding passage called the Seek, all the way back to the end, where you enter the city of Petra there by a building called the Treasury. It's not really a treasury, it's just what they made up. It's a fascinating city. It's much, much larger than you think. This Seek that you walk through is maybe at times 15 to 20 feet wide. The walls on either side of you go from 300 to 1,000 feet straight up. So it's like a crack in the earth. It makes Petra nearly an impenetrable fortress. And most prophecy scholars that have studied it believe, and for reasons that I'll show you in just a moment, that this is where the Jews, at least part of the Jews, will flee the oppression that's coming from the Antichrist during the travail that comes upon the Jewish people, the time of Jacob's trouble, in the latter part of the 70th week under the oppression of the Antichrist. And they will flee to, in part, Petra. There's a theater there. I've been there. You can see around it seats about 9,000 people, and they're like skyboxes. I mean, the Romans, they thought it up. There's other temples there and that type of thing. So Jesus tells people, flee into the mountains. And again, Revelation 12 here. Micah chapter 2, verse 12 says this, I will surely assemble all of you, Jacob. I will surely gather the remnant of Israel. I will put them together like sheep in the fold, like a flock in the midst of its pasture. Now, one of the things you know, historically, a sheepfold has one entrance. Petra has one entrance through the sea. The breaker goes up before them. They break out, pass through the gate, and go out by it. So their king goes on before them, and the Lord at their head. And so the area here, here's my slides with the Ammon, Moab, and Edom. Petra here, there's a city here right near Petra called Basra, which means, guess what? Sheepfold. I don't think there's any question that this is where a lot of the people will be heading. And then it says in Isaiah 33, he will dwell on the heights. His refuge will be the impregnable rock. I think this is a reference to Petra. His bread will be given him. His water will be sure. Your eyes will see the king in his beauty. They will behold a far distant land. Your heart will meditate on terror. Now, what's going to happen when the Jews there are in Petra? Well, we know from the prophecy in Romans chapter 11 that all Israel will be saved. Now, I think this means all Jews alive at the time of the return of Christ will be saved. Other people disagree with that. I think the only way to interpret Romans 9 through 11 is that way. And Mike and I taught on that a couple of years ago. But what happens to the people there? Well, you need to understand they're under the oppression of the Antichrist. They're being oppressed. They're being attacked. The Jews that remain in Israel are being slaughtered, according to Zephaniah and other prophetic passages. But Hosea 5, and a great book on this is Arnold Fruchtenbaum's Footsteps of the Messiah. He mentions this. This is the national redemption of Israel takes place there in Petra, when they're under travail and stress and suffering. I will go away and return to my place until they acknowledge their guilt and seek my face. In their affliction, they will earnestly seek me. It clearly says that when the Jews are in this time of travail, unlike any time of travail that they've ever been in, and they've had travail. They had the Holocaust. They've had other times of oppression. This is all part of a big piece of God's plan to bring them back to himself. And in Hosea 6, it says, this is what happens. Come, let us return to the Lord, for he has torn us, but he will heal us. He has wounded us, but he will bandage us. He will revive us up after 2 days. He will raise us up on the third day, that we may live before him. Verse 3, so let us know. Let us press on to know the Lord. His going forth is as certain as the dawn, and he will come to us like the rain, like the spring rain watering the earth. Also, O Judah, there is a harvest appointed for you when I restore the fortunes of my people. This talks about the great national restoration of the remnant of Israel. Under oppression, under persecution, under travail, they turn to the Lord. In fact, I think Arnold Fruchtenbaum makes a great case. Jesus' second coming has a precondition. The Jews cry out, Lord, please come and save us. And what does the Lord do? he returns, and Zechariah says, and then they look on him as a mother looks on his child, and they mourn. I can almost see it. Why didn't we see it all these centuries? Why didn't we listen? But Lord, our rescuer, our salvation, is here. And he comes back in response to them. Isaiah 34 says this. There's plenty of passages that support this. Draw near, O nations, to hear, and listen, O peoples. Let the earth and all it contains hear, and the world and all that springs from it. For the Lord's indignation is against the nation, all the nations, and his wrath against all their armies. He has utterly destroyed them. He has given them over to slaughter. For my sword, verse 5, is satiated in heaven. Behold, it shall descend for judgment upon what? Edom, and upon the people whom I have devoted to destruction. The sword of the Lord is filled with blood. It is sated with fat, with the blood of the lambs and goats, with the fat of the kidneys of rams. For the Lord has a sacrifice in the sheep pen in Basra, and a great slaughter in the land of Edom. This is talking about the second coming of the Lord. Look over in Revelation chapter 14, verse 17. And another angel came out of the temple which is in heaven, and he also had a sharp sickle. Then another angel, the one who has power over fire, came out from the altar, and he called with a loud voice to him who had the sharp sickle, saying, Put in your sharp sickle and gather the clusters from the vine of the earth, because her grapes are ripe. So the angel swung the sickle to the earth and gathered the clusters from the vine of the earth and threw them into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trodden outside the city, and blood came out from a winepress up to the horses' bridles for a distance of 200 miles. Let me suggest to you how that works. We talk a lot about the Battle of Armageddon. I think that's probably a misnomer. I believe that the Valley of Armageddon, the Jezreel Valley, is a staging area, because the prize that Satan and his minions and his armies and his Antichrist want is they want Jerusalem. And so the armies of the earth gather and stage in the Jezreel Valley. Napoleon called it the most perfect battlefield on the planet. He knew a thing or two about war. They want Jerusalem, but they've got to get rid of the Jewish people. Where are the Jewish people hiding out? By and large, they're hiding out in the mountains in and around Petra, Basra, the sheepfold. The Antichrist, for some reason, is not able to exercise authority over that people. He deceives the whole world, but that area, for some reason, is taken out of his area of control, according to Daniel chapter 11. So what I think happens is the armies are moving on Jerusalem and Petra, and they're strung out for this whole length. And now we understand a little bit more. It says, and the winepress was trodden outside the city, and blood came out of the winepress up to the horses' bridles for a distance of 200 miles. If you go from Megiddo to Petra, it's right about 200 miles. And so I think the Lord returns, and I think he goes to Edom first, and he takes care of business. Isaiah chapter 63 says this, I'm almost done. Who is this who comes from Edom with garments of glowing colors from Basra? This one who is majestic in his apparel, marching in the greatness of his strength. It's the Lord. It is I who speak in righteousness, mighty to save. Why is your apparel red and your garments like the one who treads in the winepress? And he answers, I have trodden the wine, though trough alone. And from the peoples there was no man with me. I also trod them in my anger and trampled them in my wrath. And their lifeblood is sprinkled on my garments, and I stain all my raiment. For the day of vengeance was in my heart, and my year of redemption has come. I looked, and there was no one to help me, and I was astonished, and there was no one to uphold. So my arm brought salvation to me, and my wrath upheld me. I trod down the peoples in my anger and made them drink in my wrath, and I poured out their lifeblood on the earth. And so, at that time, God will deal with the armies of the world who've gathered against Jerusalem and against his chosen people. And he will defeat them in the winepress of his wrath. Now, am I exactly right on the distance? It's pretty close if you take the roads. If you go straight, it's not that far. But we know the roads kind of wind around down there. So adding that in, it comes up to almost 200 miles. I don't think there's any question what's happening. Those armies of the earth through that whole valley through there are utterly destroyed by the Lord returning in glory and in his wrath to rescue, to answer the requests of the Jewish people to be rescued. And he will. And then all Israel will be saved. It's a great prophecy. If you ever had a chance to go to Petra. The Bible, the prophecies, I think are pretty exact in many cases, this one in particular, as to what will happen. But God will, through that terrible time for the peoples of the earth, will be glorified, and God alone. Because he will bring his people back to himself. So, it'll be at the same time, a horrific and a wonderful day, and we'll probably get to see what's going on. So, if we're ready. So let's pray. Father, thanks for your prophecies. Thanks for being so exact. Lord, give us the strength to be testimonies in this world that seems to be falling apart. And give us the courage to stand for what is righteous and just, and to protect zealously your word and the truths that are contained therein. Give us the courage, give us what to say, gather more people with us so that we can stand as a group. Lord, I just pray that you will somehow, through your Spirit, gather the faithful remnant that's out there into good Bible-believing churches and fellowships so that people will have that courage and support and strength that they'll get from the other believers. Just pray that all those people out there that write to us each week, you will guide them to a faithful group where they can learn about you and worship with others about the great work of your Son. Bless us as we go this week. In Jesus' name, amen.